We're asked,
Quran 79, verse 15, "Has the story of Moses reached you?"
the only place the Meccans could have heard of Moses is from the same source Muhammad heard it, the Hanifs, who had heard it from the Jews, both of whom he plagiarized.
When his Lord called upon him in the valley of Tuah twice, "Go to Pharaoh, verily he has become inordinate, transgressed all bounds, and rebelled, and say to him, Wouldst thou that thou should be purified?"
Okay, I let that verse go unedited. You'll have to figure out what Allah was trying to say on your own. Normally, I try to clean up his stylistic and grammatical errors in order to make the reading easier.
Verse 19, "And that I guide to you your Lord, so you should fear him."
Not love him, for to know the dark spirit of Islam is to fear him. There is nothing more dangerous than a little knowledge. Still in Mecca, Muhammad didn't know enough about Moses or his mission to keep from impugning himself. The reason Yahweh sent Moses to Pharaoh had nothing to do with the Egyptian monarch and everything to do with the Jewish people. On the corruption scale, Pharaoh was less rebellious and inordinate than most other dictators. In fact, Egypt was the most moral of all ancient societies. But the Jewish people were enslaved, and Yahweh wanted them freed. These errors were not careless. They were part of Muhammad's twisted plan. The prophet was a failure among his people. They mocked him and his claims mercilessly. To redeem himself, our charlatan needed to make his self-serving quest look like a godly mission. So he elected to corrupt the Exodus story. Only it didn't fit. Moses wasn't sent as a messenger to preach to Pharaoh. He was sent to free his people from bondage. Therefore, Muhammad had to corrupt the story to serve his personal agenda. But he didn't do a very good job.
Quran 79, verse 20, "Then Moses showed him the great sign, but Pharaoh rejected and disobeyed."
Sorry, the first sign wasn't mighty. In fact, it was so meaningless it was replicated by Pharaoh's magicians. Moses' staff became a snake. It wasn't until Pharaoh became obstinate that Yahweh's signs, not Moses's, became plagues of epic proportion.
Verse 21, "He turned his back, striving against the Lord."
Oops, Pharaoh wasn't fighting against God. He thought he was a god. Pharaoh was trying to keep his Jewish slaves, nothing more.
"Then he collected his people and cried, I am your Lord, the Most High."
Good grief, Muhammad's Lord needs a history lesson. Pharaoh, like most dictators of his day, was considered to be a god, but never the Most High. The pharaohs built temples to the sun god Amun-Ra. Allah and our Rahman, pagan moon gods themselves, ought to have known that.
Quran 79, verse 25, "So the Lord seized him with punishment for his last and first crime, making an example of him. Truly this is an instructive warning for whoever fears the consequences."
With every word, Muhammad dug himself in deeper. Yahweh never seized Pharaoh, nor did he make an example of him. All Yahweh did was up the ante until Pharaoh let his people go. The truth simply didn't fit Islam's agenda or capabilities. Muhammad couldn't even coax his spirit to turn a snake into a stick. Yet he is without excuse. He claimed Allah was Yahweh, so he should have known about the exodus of his people. But alas, without these bastardized Bible stories, his Quran would have been a very thin book, a pamphlet at best. Without segue, we jump to
Quran 79, verse 27, "What? Are you the harder to create, or is heaven? He raised its height and put it into a right good state."
This must be a trick question, because we are harder to create. You can find Allah's heaven replicated in any whorehouse. Throughout the Quran, the proofs of God's existence are absurd. Here heaven, which cannot be seen, is called a sign.
Quran 79, verse 29, "Its night he endows with darkness, and its splendor he brings out."
By his own admission, he is the prince of darkness. This is the third time Islam's dark spirit has shown an affinity for the night. Score another point for those who claim Islam is demonic. The Quran says its God
"Spread the earth, brought water therefrom,
and
fixed the mountains firmly to be a benefit for men and cattle.
Then,
in Quran 79, verse 34, when the disastrous calamity comes, and hell fire shall be placed in full view for all to see, then for him who rebelled, hell fire will be his home.
in a verse that could define hypocrisy, Muhammad, the ultimate sexual libertine, tells us that those who refrain from lust will be rewarded with lust.
Quran 79, verse 40. For those who feared standing before his Lord's tribunal and restrained himself from impure lustful desires, their abode will be the garden of bliss.
Well, this wasn't the most demonic surah, or the most dim-witted. It was the most poorly written. It's little wonder Muslims say the Quran cannot be translated. Thus far we have reviewed 25 surahs, nearly a quarter of Allah's book. We have yet to encounter anything profound, anything that resembles holiness. And as we turn the page to the 80th surah, we discover that it opens without benefit of a subject.
Quran 80, verse 1. Frowned and turned away.
The translators assumed it was
the prophet.
But it's time I present a surah without benefit of Allah's little helpers, so that you might see how they were actually written. The
He frowned
surah.
Frowned and turned away, because there came to him the blind man. And how can you know that he might become pure, or that teaching might profit him? As for him who thinks himself self-sufficient, to him you attend. What does it matter to you if he will not become pure? But as to him who came to you running, it is afraid. Of him you are neglectful, and divert your attention to another. Nay, indeed, it is an admonition, so whoever wills, let him mind it.
Grammatical errors, omissions, and poor writing quality aside, this surah demonstrates why Ishaq's sirah is more essential to Islam than the Quran. Without the context his chronology of oral reports provides, this Quranic story, like all others, is senseless. Ishaq explains that while trying to promote himself, Muhammad ignored this poor blind man in favor of a Quraysh chief. The reason was obvious. The chief had everything Muhammad had coveted. The blind man didn't. Teaching the blind man would not profit him. The next verse also begins without a subject.
Quran 80, verse 13. In books held in exalted, kept pure and holy, by the hands of scribes, honorable, pious, just, noble, and righteous.
This verse alone makes Islam an open and shut case, condemning Muhammad as a fraud. The
exalted books kept pure and holy
were the Torah, Psalms, and Gospels. They were the only books, other than the Quran, that Allah and Muhammad said were divinely inspired scripture. Yet there were no Quranic scribes at this point, as the Quran was not written. The first Islamic scribe during Muhammad's lifetime resigned within days of accepting the job, only to be hunted down and assassinated by the Prophet. The real scribes of this day were a well-known order of devoutly pious Jews. But the scripture they
kept pure and holy
was the antithesis of the Quran. Coveting what rightfully belonged to Yahweh, Islam's dark spirit categorically stated that the Bible was his book. Equally important, he said that it had been kept pure and holy by honorable scribes. So wouldn't you know it, the first time he said something nice, it killed him. If the Bible was kept pure, there is no possible explanation for the divergence in Quranic stories, the difference in gods or doctrines. If Allah said this, as Muhammad attests, he committed suicide, because he destroyed Islam. For if the Bible is, as Allah said, inspired and pure, then a book that repudiates its doctrines and damns its people can be neither inspired nor pure. It's simple logic. If B is right, and if Q condemns B, Q cannot be right. So what does that make Q? The Meccans knew Muhammad was wrong. They just didn't know why. During the 7th century, they were about as unfamiliar with biblical scripture as most agnostics today. They knew enough to rebuke Muhammad for stealing Jewish stories, saying that the Quran was nothing more than other people's lore. But while they recognized his